the role of judges in race walk events. I'm just going to try to get back to my PowerPoint. All right, I hope we all see that. I have a lot of slides. As Jane said, it's a large PowerPoint. You'll have a copy if you want it after. I might skip some areas. We'll go quickly on some areas because of the interest in other parts. This is not a course on how to judge. It is a course. It's a webinar that would talk about role of judges. But I want to introduce concepts that some people may or may not be aware. We'll talk about cautions with paddles. We'll talk about how to apply DQs. We'll talk about posting boards. We'll talk about the penalty zone, things that may not apply to regular track events or road events, but that do apply to the race walk. So we'll go beyond just the judges. We'll do the whole concept of walking competition. That's my goal tonight. Here's our outline. We'll talk about the start, the beginning, the definition of race walk. We'll talk about all the judges and what their roles are, how the judging, the disqualification, the duties of the chief, briefly. How is it that we get communication around an event so that goes smoothly? Other officials that are needed at an event. Important note, I'll get to that later, and how to prepare for a race walk event. And in the conclusion, I'll give you some tips on where to read more information. Now, the definition of race walking, I have a little problems. I cannot read the whole thing. So let me go back into my book. So, because I have some people, well, unless I change, just give me a sec. There you go. Okay, so now I can see everything. Whoops, back up. Let's start at the beginning. A very good place to start. Race walk is a progression of steps taken so that walker makes contact with the ground with no visible to the human eye loss of contact occurs. The advancing leg must be straightened, not bent at the knee, from the moment of the first contact with the ground until a vertical upright position. This is the new rule 54.2 in technical rules. Now, this means that contrary to other events in track and field, performance are not only measured in time or distance like you do any other event, but they are also judged. The judging the form is also key. Very important. And then there are two parts, as we could read, two parts of the form. So that's why we need race walk judges, people who will look for the definition in all of the athletes to see the athletes are conforming to the definition and act accordingly. We'll see how it goes. Now, what I'm going to look is at how it's done at the highest level to see how we could adapt at the lower level of competitions. If you understand how it's working at the international competitions at the highest level, then we could understand all the concept and apply it to our own national or provincial competitions. The first part of the presentation would generally base on the World Championship in 2019 in Doha, where I was the chief judge, as Jane said, and also based on my 27 years of experience on the international panel. Here's a list of race walk judges and judges that are needed at international competitions. They are appointed in brackets is who appointed them. So you have a chief judge, 5 to 8 judges, depending if it's a track event or road event. Assistant chief judge, chief judge assistants. That might be appointed by World Athletics or the local organizing committee, and recorders, because we have a lot of paperwork to deal with. I want to make a note here. It might be called a chief judge's assistant. They're there to assist in notification of disqualification. They're not acting as race walk judges, period. It's there to notify the athlete faster, so that on average, we could get a notification of disqualification in an athlete within 2 minutes. The main reason for that is that in the past, we've had some experience of people walking for a long period of time before they could be notified, particularly if you get to a place where the event starts in the stadium, ends in the stadium. Just a quick note, in '97, I was chief judge in Athens for the 50K. We had a course outside the stadium. I had to be posted in the stadium for the final part of the race. And one of the athletes was disqualified with a third card coming up when the athlete was still on the course before, and he walked for about an hour before got notification. So the rules have changed since then because we want to make sure the athletes don't walk for nothing. There are other key officials in this event. That would be people who are at the posting board officials and those who are in the penalty zone. Those two terms will be defined for those who don't know about it, and we'll define their role as well. And we also have other officials that are involved in competitions. Obviously, if it's a road event, you also need to have people in the call room. I say as many as needed because you could have 100 participants in the race walk event and a limited amount of time to process them. Lap scoring, the same thing. We don't want to have lap scorers who are taking too many athletes. And we want umpires to watch over refreshment zones, stations rather, and obviously as any other good event, you need the referee. One thing I want to make sure here is that we understand that the competition and technical rules, the new version that we have, in the competition section, it's called international competition, and it's in page 27, 28, and it defines different setup, like different types of competition. 1.1 would be at the international, the highest level, so it goes highest level downwards to a not so high level of international competitions. And it's important because it might be peculiar to race walking, but not the same rules apply to different rules apply to different events. Let's put it this way. And we only, in this case here, we're only going to deal with international competitions. And how do we apply that to our national and provincial competitions? We'll see that a little bit later. But I want to stress out that the rules are there for specific competitions, and that opens the door to what do we do if we're not in those competitions, and we'll see that later. Now we'll switch to judges and the judging, and that has multiple parts. We will define the different levels of judging, and then how do we operate. World Athletics has two judging levels. The World Athletic International level international race walk judges, it is entirely controlled by World Athletics. And the area level of international race walk judges, which is controlled by the area, and in our case is NACAC Athletics. Just point out that we have our little level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in our country, and the level 5 is not one of those two. Our level 5 is controlled by Athletics Canada, by a National Officials Committee, and it's actually a step below the last one. So it's the entry point to the area level, to attend the clinic to be an area level judge. So we may call it international, but it's not part of the two international world that World Athletics would recognize. Now, World Athletics events held under paragraph 1.1 would be the World Championship Olympic Games. And in those events, obviously, we need members from different, we need judges from different members, different countries, so there is no appearance of bias and that no one country controls the race. And they're only going to be people at the highest level of judges. At the moment, at the highest level, there's 24 of us, if I understand correctly. And this would apply to anything that's world championships. That includes the World Team Championships, World Juniors. When we had the World Youth, we did that. And obviously the Olympic Games. Then for other international events that are not 1.1, so 1.2, 3, etc., that you can see on your screen, for example, a Grand Prix event, the Pan Am Games, other international events, judges from area level or World Athletic level international judges would be appointed. I'm putting it down there. However, for practical reasons, 2 judges from the same member could be appointed in certain circumstances. And I'll give you an example how it happened. Grand Prix meet in Mexico about 2 to 3 years ago. I don't remember exactly. One judge from the USA who lived in New York State was snowed in. He couldn't make it. So we had 2 judges from Mexico to have the right number of judges. However, what this meant is that this rule here would apply is under competition under those rule 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.5. Under no circumstances, red cards from 2 judges affiliated from the same member may have the power to disqualify or sending an athlete to penalty zone. We'll see that later. What this means is that we want to make sure that there is no control of a country over the disqualifications of any athlete. So that's a little caveat that applies to those rules, and that's fine because we don't want to, as I said earlier, have a country controlling an event. For dual meets like that we do Canada-US, for example, which is 1.4, and if you notice 1.4 wasn't here, it's now here, and it doesn't apply because typically what we do for those competition is we have mostly the hosting country who have the most judges, and maybe 1 or 2 come from the other country, and it would definitely not be practical to do that. Now, what are the duties of a judge? I will point out a couple of steps in there. The judges are there to ensure the conformity of the 2 parts of the rule, no loss of contact and no bend knees. The judge will act alone in an area assigned to them and impartially. So the rest is like just kitchen stuff. You arrive in advance and you make sure that you don't talk to anybody else. After the competition, you're going to be talking to the rest of the people so that we have a post-race meeting, and so everybody can compare the results of the events and know the results, overall results at that point. So I'm backing up to say very first and most important job of a judge is to judge to judge the conformity of the 2 parts of the rules, not just one, but both of them. Okay, now we'll introduce a concept to some of you may or not know that. What's a yellow paddle? Yellow paddle is basically a caution to an athlete. We're giving a yellow paddle to an athlete when we're in doubt that the athlete is conforming to the definition that we read earlier. Now, when a judge is not completely satisfied that an athlete is fully complying with the rules 54.2 of the technical rules, he should, wherever possible, show the athlete a yellow paddle with some symbol, with the symbol of the offense on each side. An athlete cannot be shown a second paddle, the same judge, the same offense. Having shown the paddle to an athlete, the judge shall inform the chief judge of his action after the competition. Now, 2 different offense, so you don't show 2 paddles to the same kind of paddle. Here are the paddles. For those who've never seen it, we have a paddle for bend knee, the first on the left, the paddle for loss of contact, this yellow on the right, and the red paddle in the middle is for only the chief judge or chief judge's assistant to show disqualification. And you can't flip on the screen, but on the other side of the bent knee paddle is a bend knee paddle. When the whole set of paddles started in 1983, most people use a ping pong paddle and one sign on one side of the paddle, the other sign on the other, and that caused confusion because you would show an athlete something and the rest of the population on the other side would see something else. So that's why we're making it obvious now that when you have a paddle, you show a loss of contact paddle. Both sides of the people on both sides of the paddle will see the same thing. So the paddles, as I said earlier, here, I'll go back a second. We want to show an athlete when we're not satisfied. That's a caution. But it says an athlete cannot be shown the second paddle from the same judge for the same offense. However, a judge could show a yellow paddle, sorry, for loss of contact, and later in the competition, a yellow paddle for a bent knee. That's okay, because it's not the same offense. And that happens on occasion on the 50K, for example, where an athlete could start faster and then have difficulty keeping their knee straight towards the end of the competition. And I would say that having shown a paddle to an athlete, you're not supposed to show a second yellow paddle to the same judge, the same offense. I have to tell you, I have done that before. And most of the judges who have been with large crowds have done that. When you have 120 Chinese athletes in international competition, you may accidentally give a second yellow paddle of the same offense, the same athlete, without realizing it at first. I'll talk to you about that a little later. Now, here is the next step. When a judge observes an athlete failing to comply with the rule, and by exhibiting visible loss of contact or bend knee during any part of the competition, the judge shall send a red card to the chief judge. Now, the athlete doesn't see that. The athlete doesn't see that the judge will send a red card. You will see it later when we put it on the board, and we'll get to that in a minute. So this is after you've given a warning, a caution rather, to an athlete that they're not walking, don't think they're walking properly. This is what you need to do, is send to the chief your red card to say, I think that athlete is not walking properly, and then therefore should be disqualified. Now, here's a little note, is that we mostly do give a yellow paddle before, but there are circumstances like these three where the yellow paddle may not be applicable. An athlete who's breaking the rule, obviously breaking the rules, getting an unfair advantage, or an athlete who's later part of the race and it's the last time you're going to see the athlete, it's too late to show a paddle, or we'll talk about the judges, the chief judge, the last 100 meters later. Now, here's what a red card looks like, and it's red. And the reason is that it will be easy to identify. Why we talk about a red card? In the past, years and years and years ago, before we had the paddles, we had also a white card for warning. So this is gone. This has been gone for 37 years, but the red card remained red. And that's because it's easier to spot. And then you fill up by putting a distance, the number of the athlete bib number, and what's most important at what time is the infraction, whether it's a loss of contact or bend knee infraction. Your identifier, your signature. So the judge will fill that, as I said earlier, not showing to the athlete what he's doing or she doing, and then it will be sent to the recorder, and then the flow would continue. In the meantime, as a judge, you fill your record. Judge's record, where you have the name, the number of the number of the athletes here, and you put the time where you give an athlete a yellow paddle or a red card, and you keep track of that so that we know exactly when it happened, when it's summarized at the end, and we could follow the flow. Now, here's a little tidbit. You have 30 little space in there. So if you have a competition with 30 or less athletes, what you could do is you could write the numbers numerically ordered, and then it's easy to spot athlete 1, 2, 3. If it's 1, 2, 3 happens to be right here, then easy for you to figure it out what happened. If you have more than the page contains, then you just write them as you show them. The first athlete, you show yellow paddle, you put in the first square, and so on and so forth. When I mentioned earlier that it's possible that you could give a second yellow paddle for the same offense, when you have 2 or 3 of those cards to fill, then yes, sometimes you can't flip fast enough to see if you've given 1, 2, 3, already given 1, 2, 3 a yellow paddle, so that may happen. No harm done here. So it's usually an international competition. We have more than 30, so officials will fill up from the top to the bottom. But as you may or may not know, not everyone will get a yellow paddle or a red card. So if you have 50 athletes, you may need only one of those cards, because probably half the field won't get any of won't get a yellow paddle, or certainly won't get a red card. That happens, you want to have enough space, so you may be given a second card, but you probably won't fill it. And at the bottom, as you can see, you fill it so that people with your name, your judge name and number, so you are known at the end when the tabulation is done. Now, the judges are located on the track 80 meters apart when you have 5 judges around a track event, for example. On the roads, we have 2 kilometer with 8 judges, maybe around 125 meters apart. Judges will move in that area that they're given, but that's rough estimate. The reason I'm showing that there are 1 kilometer or 2 kilometer is more and more events of 20 kilometers or less would be in a 1 kilometer on a back course. Then it could be with 8 or 6 judges. Mostly at our national events, we can't have more than 6, so that's why I showed it here. And but you could have other type of events where it's along a loop. Part of it is on the loop, part of it is an out and back, like we did in Toronto a couple of years ago at the NACAC. Then you have to position the judges slightly differently, obviously. So the courses where you start and finish in the stadium, just like this one, we do less and less of those, and we do more and more of the this, like we did in Doha, out and back courses. And on the left is a 2K loop for the 50K, and only a 1K loop for the 20K. And that means you see the athletes more often, but also you're not using as much space. And just as an example, our national championships a year ago in Montreal, we did them a 20K on a 1K loop, and that worked very fine. Those who were there, you might remember that. Now, I've talked about sending cards. The cards get to the recorder. Now, how to get to the recorder, we'll see that later, because there are different methods to send cards to the recorder. The recorder will keep track of the red cards of each athlete and inform the posting board official a red card to post. Now, we'll see what the posting board looks like in a minute, but we keep track of all the red cards because they're proposition of disqualification for an athlete by a judge. So we want to make sure we don't lose any of those. The recorder will inform the penalty zone. Again, we'll see what that means later. Official when 3 red cards from judges from 3 different members are received for an athlete. And a recorder will inform the chief judge and the chief judge's assistant when 4 red cards are given for one particular athlete. We'll follow that a little bit later. Now, this is what a control point or recording station looks like. For those who know, in the middle was Luis Saladie from Spain, who was a recorder for a number of years, now works for the World Athletics. And this was in Daegu in 2011. And the chief was standing right behind. And as you can see, that's where they record, and they have electronics recording. Now, what is a posting board? You may ask, you may not have seen it. One or more posting board shall be placed on the course and near the finish to keep athletes informed about the number of red cards they have been sent to the chief judge and for an athlete. The symbol of each offense should be also indicated on the posting board. Why do we say that? It's because the posting board, and I'll show you quickly what the posting board look like. There you go. And you have symbols indicating when an athlete has received, for example, this athlete has received 3 red cards. This athlete of the same type, this athlete has 3 red cards, but the different types. And it's for the athletes when they walk by. I told you the judge doesn't show the red card to the athlete will know when it's posted that I'm number 122. Oh, I have nothing. The next time I go by, if there's a red dot, then I know that I have something. So it's to inform the athletes of the number of the proposal disqualification they have received so far. Now, I'll go back a bit, and the posting board must ensure that the athlete received from the recorder is posted as soon as possible on the board. The main reason is we don't want to waste time. We want to make sure athletes get the information ASAP so that they know what's going on, not wait a lap or two. As soon as we post it with electronic means, it could be posted within a minute. And as I said, the posting board should be visible on both sides of the course so athletes could see it both ways. Now here's an electronic, as I said earlier. Here's the post board that is manual. Goes back a number of years, as you can see. I don't have a most recent picture. I usually don't take pictures when I'm judging. And now the indication here would have a fourth column, and I will explain why later. But as you can see, the symbols are on it, indicating what the cause of, and these numbers are in numerical order, and there were 41 of them, so that was easy to fit in the board. Actually, they had to add a little one here, but that was the intent. If you have 120 athletes, you're going to post them as they arrive. If number 499 is the first one, that's the first one that's going to be posted here, and so on and so forth. And as I said, maybe only not even half the athletes in this particular case, as you can see, we do have only 14 athletes who got red cards out of 41, so not everybody would get a red card. Now, history of the post board, just quickly, it started in the late 80s. It's been recommended in a rule book since early 1990s, but it's been mandatory since 94. So probably not all provincial competitions have followed that in the last 26 years. But it's to indicate to the athletes how many disqualification proposals they've received so far. It's information that is required for them, and we need to do that. Any competitions that we do, this is not a plus. This is not a nice to have, it's a must have. And it's been there for a number of years, as you can see. Now, here's the new term, penalty zone. And I'll explain why do we have a penalty zone, where it comes from. So I'll spend a little bit of time here. The history of the penalty zone is that at some international competition, particularly youth and juniors, some of the athletes were disqualified very early in the competition, very quickly. The judges were there and they saw an athlete going by, and within 2 laps, they got 3 red cards and the athlete was gone. And if you do a 10K on the track and you're disqualified within the first 3 or 4 laps, it may be because you've never been judged by an international judge elsewhere. So the thought here was to give an athlete a chance to stop in the penalty zone, which was called at the time pit lane, and to give him a chance to recuperate and spend some penalty time and go back. So if you're in the leading pack, if you're to be penalized by some time, you may not be able to win the competition, but you could continue, which is the aim of the penalty zone. Now, the penalty zone, as you can see in the yellow, and that's where it becomes murky. Penalty zones shall be used for races where the applicable regulation for competition so provide, and may be used for other races as determined by relevant governing body or organizers. So, in other words, penalty zone is optional. So what I've been doing so far is with the penalty zone, because we had the penalty zone in Doha, but it's not for every competition to have a penalty zone. Now here's the time that you spent for a penalty zone. It's on average a minute for every 10K. If you have a race that's a 6 kilometer, then that doesn't apply. This is the one that applies. Up to 5,000 meters, half a minute. But if you have a 6 or 8 kilometer race, then you'll have to have one full penalty. Or if you have a 25-kilometer race, you're going to apply 3 minutes. And an athlete who fails to enter or doesn't remain there long enough, the rule says will be disqualified by the referee. It used to be the chief judge, but it's more or less it's not applying the rules of it's disciplinary more than judging. Now, under these rules, an athlete receive a third red card is no longer practical to direct them to the penalty zone. For example, very last part of the race, communication maybe is fast, but not fast enough. The athlete finishes and should have gone to the penalty zone. Then you add time to his you had the designated time that we mentioned earlier to his time and adjust his performance in the ranking accordingly. So it's just to make sure that that doesn't help the athlete. It makes a playing field the same for everybody. You didn't go there, but this is the time you should have spent there. Now, here's, as I said, the history of the penalty zone. I probably should have put that slide earlier. Penalty zone, originally called the pit lane, it's young for youth and junior, and it's only started in 2014. That's like a reasonably new feature. And the first event was in Youth Olympic in 2014. And here's the interesting kicker. The team competition want to adopt that, because if you're in a team competition and you have 3 athletes and 3 to score and want to get disqualified, then you don't score. The team is no longer a team. However, if you have one of the athletes gets to the penalty zone and don't get another red card after that, then the team could score. So that's why the team competition it's adopted in those formats. But now it's wildly adopted within the international community. Almost all international competition have been in the last the last couple of years, I should say, is adopting it, and then a lot of member federations are also adopting the penalty zone. Here's a picture of penalty zone in Doha last fall. You enter here. There's a mat that starts a clock. That's a proper time. Clock is here. We can't see the clock. And this is the entrance and exit. But it's not specifically a shape. It's just enough space for athletes to have 2, 3 of them at the same time in the penalty zone, set so that they don't bump into each other. And so that's what it looks like. And as you can see, it was taken at 23:07 because last year in Doha, the races started at 23:30, middle of the night. And that's because it was 30 degrees. Actually, it was 31 degrees when we started and 30 when we ended, with 60 to 70% humidity. So you understand why we do it at night. And the lighting system was fantastic, so it almost like daytime. But this is what a penalty zone looks like. It doesn't have to have a particular shape as long as it's wide enough with an entrance and an exit separate. Here's, as I said, pit lane. First, the one that was in 2014 in the World Youth Olympic. Now, we've talked about red cards. We've talked about this. Now we're talking about disqualification. How does it apply? Now, at any time an athlete receives an additional red card from another judge other than the 3 who sent the previous cards, as we say here, they shall be disqualified. So up to 4 cards. After the athlete spend the time in the penalty zone after 3 red cards, if the 4th card comes in, the athlete should be disqualified. And the other part is, as I said earlier, the penalty zone for people who are not remaining in the right period of time. The recorder will inform the chief judge assistant when 4 red cards from 4 judges from 4 different members are received for an athlete. And whoever the first one who sees the athlete will give the red paddle to the athlete, whether it's the chief judge or one of the 2 chief judge assistants. It's just to make sure that it goes fast. Ken Wall might remember that when we were in 2001 in Edmonton, him and I were the 2 assistants It was the first year that the rule of assistance took place, and that was our job, is to give the red cards to the athletes, and we were in communication to make sure that we were doing it as fast as possible, so nobody would walk on the course for any period of time without, that wasn't necessary. Now, there's another sheet that we fill up, the judging summary sheet from the recorder, and where all the red cards are put, so that they know that there's 2 red cards for an athlete, or 3 or 4, and this is how we keep track of that. And at the end of the race, we add to that all the given yellow paddle, so that the summary sheet has not only the disqualification, the suggestion for disqualification, but also the action of the judges. That's why we said earlier that you need to keep track of what you do when you give a yellow paddle. And this is what the summary sheets look like. Now, I'll go quickly on the duty of the chief. Here it says in competition L under those rules, those competitions, international competition definition, the chief has the power to disqualify an athlete in the last 100 meters when their mode of progression obviously fails to comply with the rule, regardless of number of previous red cards. So that's the extraordinary power, what we call that the chief judge may have for the last 100 meters. That also was added in 2001. Because sometimes an athlete, and as I said, in those days, frequently the athletes would leave the stadium, go back into the stadium, and euphoria or whatever, the last 100 meters, maybe they would not be complying with the rules. So that gives the chief judge the chance to disqualify an athlete who was obviously not complying with the rules. And I can tell you, I have done that at international events. But chief judge shall be only acting as a supervisory official of the official. So he's not judging during the competition. He or she is not judging during the competition, except for the rule mentioned, as I just mentioned. This is Rule 54 for the first part of 2, and it indicates that at the international level, the chief judge's job is not to judge, except for the last 100 meters, but to be a supervisor of judging. We make sure that we get some stuff done before the competition. This is kitchen stuff. Ensure that everything's okay, confirm the referee, etc. This is the full definition of the special power. You could find it in Rule 54 4.1. After the event, the chief judge will have a meeting with all the judges. And we'll make sure before that, that they will give the referee all the indication of the athletes that were disqualified, just to confirm that did they finish, did they not finish. If they did finish, then they have to be taken out the results. Most of the time they don't, but it has been seen that an athlete was shown the red paddle in the last lap and continued on, so to make sure that the athlete get disqualified, or if you get the 3rd card or 4th card in this case, after the competition is done, and we tabulate, then you have to apply the disqualification after. So summary sheet is done in conjunction with the recorder. And then we have a post-event meeting with the judges to discuss anything that was important. Now, how do those red cards get to the recorder? Now, we have different methods to do that, but international competitions, it's done with handheld computer devices, electronically. Seiko does World Championship. Olympic Games are usually done by Omega, and that's similar system, and that's what it looks like. It's a panel that enters the number of the athlete, what is the offense, and sends into the recorder, and the mechanism is to receive a reply back to say, okay, here, is that what you want to send? If it's yes, you say okay, then it's gone. It's what you want. And then they receive it, it's confirmed, and it's recorded right away. Now, here's how it has to work, because you don't have time to have a handheld computer device in your hand. So the judge will need an assistant. The judge will fill the red card that we saw earlier. The judge will give the filled red card to the assistant, and this is the job of the assistant to use the terminal, send it back, confirmation if it's all okay, and then press OK, and the judge never hear anything from anyone. It remains independent from the system. So one way. And that's important, that you don't want to have communication and of any kind. The judges must be independent. For other competitions, you could use, there's a mobile phone app that was developed. We could use walkie-talkies. You could have a cyclist picking up red cards. You could have runners around the track. Whatever works. I'll tell you, behind the first two methods, when you have a mobile app or walkie-talkie, again, the principal, the official remains independent. You want to make sure that they have an assistant that will do the work of the app or the walkie-talkie. And again, the walkie-talkie with an earphone, so the judge doesn't hear anything. Not even a comeback, not even a word say, is that the right number? That's done by the assistant, so there is no interference. There's no, that's how we did it in Moncton in 2010, and it worked very well as long as they remain independent. Here's the other principle. When you have a cyclist, then the judge has to fill the red card and gives it to the cyclist, and it runs it to the recording. Now, the communication between recorder, chief judge, and I added the chief judge's assistant, the posting board official, the penalty zone official. It would be on a walkie-talkie or another live communication device. Kendall and I were in a very efficient communication device in 2001 in Edmonton, where there was like 4 of us online, no interference, clear words. You could say athlete 1, 2, 3, 4, 3 cards, 4 cards, whatever the case may be, and then the athlete, actually it was 3 because we didn't have a penalty zone back then, and the athlete would be disqualified. And then that would be done within 30 seconds, a minute max, because there was 3 of us, the chief and 2 assistant on a 2K loop. Nobody else was on needs to be on the channel, so that communication are fast, and the judges are not in that loop at all, so they remain independent. That's the key part again. Now, as I said earlier, the penalty zone get informed that when there are 3 cards from an athlete, so the official must have the athlete enter. So they must scout the athlete. They must follow the race and see athlete 1, 2, 3 coming in. Has to go into the penalty zone. They have to escort them in, count the time, get them out at the end, and go. Now, here's one thing that is interesting nowadays, is a lot of time we have a name in front, and the number is only in the back. So we all have a cheat sheet. We all have a concordance, the concordance between numbers and names. And sometimes you have people with the same name, same number, so we put the country name next to it. Same name, different number rather. Lopez, different names. So sometimes you have twins, so you have to make sure you send the right one into the penalty zone, or you have to write one for whom you write the red card. So it's important that the recorder gets the right information, and the penalty zone official puts them in. They're obviously going to see the name, so also have that cheat sheet to make sure they have the right athlete going into the penalty zone. So you need somebody who is experienced. You don't want just anybody who, if you have a provincial meet with numbers in front, that's not so bad. But if you have a national meet with names and you have an international event with names in front, you have to have somebody who knows what they're doing, so they don't get the wrong person into the penalty zone and give them a penalty of 2 minutes when they don't deserve one. Now, communication, again, will inform, as I said, the 4 cards. And okay, as I said that earlier, make sure that we go fast. Whomever is the first one to come in will give the disqualification to the athlete, and make it faster, and athletes get off the road or the track if need be. Other officials, now we'll go quickly over that. It's like any other off-road duties for umpires, but there are rules, specific rules about the refreshment, which event has which kind of refreshment. There's always water at the beginning, at the end, but refreshment rules only apply to certain events. You could read that in the rule book. You have lap scorers. Now, with chips, people may think they don't need lap scores, but the athletes want to know before the chip would do the count. But as the athlete go onto the carpet, but the athletes want to know before they get on the carpet how many laps they have to go. So you still count them, how many laps. Call room officials are important too, because you want to make sure they have the chips, they have the numbers, they have everything that they need. And a referee is also important, because the referee is now, all disciplinary rules fall under the referee. So, including the penalty zone. So that's why it's important that you have someone there who knows what they're doing. Okay, here's where it gets murky. And I'm going to get clear with you. This is, the penalty zone is optional, okay, which means that the governing body may decide to have it or not. Now, international level, as I said earlier, now it's almost a given there will be a penalty zone. In such cases, these three rules will apply. The rules defining a penalty zone and what to do with it. If not, it's rule 54.7.1 that applies, which talks about the old way of doing things. When you have 3 red cards, you disqualify the athlete. Now, why is this important? It means that you need to know, as I said, our organizer have to, or governing body has to make a decision. When there is no penalty zone, when it's not used, it's a rule, as I said, 54.7.1 that needs to apply, which is the old way of doing things, 3 red cards, as I said. However, here's what happens, is if you do not have a penalty zone, that rule does not apply. Sorry, on the left side is when you do want a penalty zone. The 7.1 does not apply because it only deals with 3 red cards. But the rules 54.7.2 and 54.7.8 to 8 will apply, all those. And when the governing body does not want a penalty zone, these rules do apply, but that one doesn't apply simply because that's, as I said, the definition of a penalty zone. So it's very important for you as a judge to know when you do a competition, will there be a penalty zone in that body? Would that body decide to have a penalty zone or not? And that sometimes as a governing body could be NACAC, could be Athletics Canada, could be World Athletics, could be Pan Am. You need to know before you go there what rules will apply so everybody knows if there is a penalty zone or not. And disqualification will be different. If there is a penalty zone, you need 4 judges, as we said, 3 to send someone to the penalty zone and the 4th one to disqualify the athlete. If the governing body doesn't want a penalty zone, then it's only 3 judges that disqualify, but the chief judge still has the 100 meters, could disqualify someone in the 100 meters. Now, here's a funny thing, is that this was the very first World Championship with the penalty zone. Even though we're talking 2014, didn't apply because they were given to areas, they were not in the specs of the competition when they were given to those competitions. And the World Team was the first World Team event in 2016 in Rome that used the penalty zone. And as I said, the Youth Olympic, they do want it, and that's for them. But the Rio didn't have it, and the 2 World Championships before, Doha, didn't have it. Now, as I said, it moves fast. Now it's more or less, you want it, you use it. Here's what happened at our national or provincial competition. If you're a judge in your province, if your judge asked to go into national competition, you need to know if the governing body needs a penalty zone. As I said, it's important to decide how many athletes, how many judges would get to disqualify an athlete, the penalty zone is there or not. Then the second thing is, as you see those rule number 1.1, 1.2, 1.3 of those of the rules, the definition of the international competitions. This is what is the rule book for international event. Our competitions are not covered by these rules. The definition of an international event. So we need to know whether we're going to apply that to our competition or not. If the governing body wants us as the last 100 meters as a chief to apply the power to disqualify it or not. And thirdly, we said earlier that the chief judge shall act as a supervising official for the competition, acting as a judge only in a special situation for the last 100 meters. Now, if we don't have, that means the chief judge doesn't act as a judge, but if we need the chief judge to act as a judge because we don't have a lot of judges, we need to know if it's allowed or not by the governing body. So the governing body has to decide on these three elements, and this should be consistent for all competition under that governing body. It's just like, not like this morning we're applying A, we're not applying B, or we're applying C, but not D. So it's something we want to know. It's because we want to reduce the number of judges needed and have just the bare minimum. I just wanted to remind you the bare minimum also mean that the bare minimum also means the judges need to have everybody of the same opinion if you have only 3 judges to judge. So that's a drawback, important drawback. Now, the rest of the rules do apply. The definition of race walking is the same. We apply the same way to judge. We apply the same yellow paddle, the same red cards, just the number is different to disqualify an athlete. And also the rest do apply. Now, quickly, we're going to go into the next few slides on how to prepare for a race walk event that you're invited to, if such an event occurs. Now, as I point out again, we need to know what the 3 elements are, whether there's a penalty zone, yes or no, the chief judge during the event will judge, yes or no, the chief judge disqualified the first last 100 meters, yes or no. The governing body should have decided that beforehand, and that would help you find out how you're going to operate. The chief judge will have to make sure that everybody has what they need and give a unique number to a judge, to each judge, so that we have a unique number at the end. The rest is just protocol. We'll conduct a pre-meeting, we'll conduct a post-meeting, we'll make sure that communicate all their method, how to collect the cards, etc. And so this is for, you'll have the deck so you could read that. Now, the judge has the important job of judging the event. Make sure that the rules are applied. Make sure that you have the 2 yellow paddle. Make sure that you know what location you're at. Make sure you're independent and impartial. No gathering of judges. Making sure that you inform the chief of what your action. If you form an opinion, act immediately. Don't wait a lap or 2 or 3 or 5. You made a decision to do a paddle, give the paddle. You made a decision to write a red card, write a red card. Make sure you complete all the documentation, the judge's record and the sent to the recorder. And judges will try to be on the outside whenever possible. Remember, there's a curve on the track, and on the road you work both sides. That's fine, because sometimes you need to see things from 2 different angles. When we have a limited number of athletes, the recorder and the posting board could be the one and same person. Don't do that if you have 100 athletes, but if you have 10 athletes or less or something, or somebody who's very knowledgeable, that could be done. So reducing the number of people involved in the competition, but there are 2 different jobs and they have both to be done. And here's an easy way to set up a penalty zone on the track with an entry and an exit. You just take the last 4 lanes to set it up, about 80 meters from the end. The post board is here, the recorder is there, everybody is in the same area, and that makes it easy for the people to enter. The official will enter the athletes into the pit lane. Sorry, it's now called penalty zone. I should have worked that out. Anyway, and here are 2 references that, here are 2 references that you may want to look into. Obviously, the competition and technical rules. We went through very quickly into some of them. Here's another one that's interesting, but it's March 16th, so it's a little dated, but organizing and a guide to judge and organizing. Those 2 could be downloaded from the athletics library technical information section, and a very resourceful information that could be used for how to apply the rules and how to do. And if you are one of those who not only do want to judge, but also may organize a competition, this is a very good reference to make sure that you do know how to organize as I said, the caveat is it's a little old, and the definition of a penalty zone is in there. It just have to think about the fact that we now apply it most of the time, and that's how we go. So I'm concluding here with anybody who has any question. I suppose I have to stop my this. And Jane, you taking over?
Yes, I'd just like to encourage anybody, if you have a comment or a question, if you would unmute your computer, identify yourself, and then speak clearly and ask Danielle whatever your question or concern is. So we'll open the floor.
Houston has a question. Houston L.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Hello. Okay, hi Danielle, thanks very much for your presentation. It was really interesting. I have a couple of questions.
Yep.
Is there such a thing as an independent judge, or so if you have two judges from the same country or region, is there such a thing as an independent? I have a second one. Do you want to hear them all, or do you want to hear them one at a time?
Well, I don't know what you mean by independent. You work independently, which means that you're not talking to anybody during the race, during the event. So you're not influenced by anybody.
Sorry, I mean geographically. Is there such a thing as, so like, let's say hypothetically there was NACAC or something and you had not enough judges from the different regions?
Yes. Okay, I'll give you an example. In NACAC 2 years ago in Toronto, on Toronto Island, we had 2 Canadian judges. And so we had more than one from the same member federation. So we had to apply the rule that both of us, both of us could not disqualify an athlete. Now, we also could have a judge from a different part of the world going to, for example, a judge from Asia going to European Championship. That could happen too. So they're not within the countries of the region. Question.
Okay.
But the key word independent and impartial is that you work by yourself. You're not influenced by anybody else when you're judging. So no conversation with another judge, nothing like that. You just do your own judging independently.
Okay, sure. No, you answered the thing about the geography. So what happens if during the race you said that if a judge has to leave his post to communicate with the chief judge, but what if they're unable to fulfill their responsibilities? If for whatever reason, for health reasons, they can't fulfill their responsibility or the role and the race is still on, what happens then?
Well, good question. What happens is that if you inform the chief that you can't do it, or if you have an assistant, in the case of somebody, when we're using assistants to circulate with the red cards faster, then you make the point to the assistant will communicate with the recorder who would tell the chief judge that you're unable to fulfill your duty, and then the chief judge will reassign the people so there is no gap anywhere.
Okay, all right.
I have seen that the judge who became ill during a competition and was not able to finish the event, so we all shifted by 50 meters to make sure that we covered the whole 2K loop, and that's how it happened. At first we didn't know what happened. We were told move, so we moved, and at the end, when the post event, we found out that the judge was ill and couldn't complete.
Okay, thank you. And also, maybe it's not the appropriate place for this, but is there any further discussion about chips in the shoes? Not a timing chip, but last year there was some discussion about in order to aid judges if for lifting purposes.
Okay. So the shoes that are in the works to have an indication when the number of steps taken off the ground would. Okay, so I haven't touched that because it's not on yet. And to explain to people what it is they're trying to develop a sole that they will put into a shoe that will detect when an athlete is off the ground and will count how many times he's off the ground and maybe have a counter. The rule says to the human eye. So if you are looking at a video, frequently you can't see everything from the naked eye. So yes, we know there might be a period of time where the athlete is off the ground completely. But what would happen if those soles would insert into the shoes is that they would count how many times it happens, and after a certain number of times and a certain delay, and the athlete would be automatically disqualified. Well, now I haven't heard much about it in the last year, but it's in development. But that
Okay.
means it may not happen at provincial or national events because we're not that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Kenwall has a question. Go ahead, unmute Kenwall.
Danielle, thanks for very detailed information about anything. Just curious, how many athletes do actually use the penalty zone right now?
Oh, it depends from competition to competition. I would say that when we were in Doha, we had probably for 75 athletes